Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar entitled Rate Center Consolidation, What You Need to Know Now. I am Jackie Walgemuth, Director of Global Standards Development with ADIS, and I'm one of today's moderators along with Joe Seibel. Today's webinar is being recorded for future playback. All participants are muted by default and placed in listen-only mode. If you have any questions, please submit those via the online question function. We're going to hold all questions until the end of the presentation, and we'll try to address as many of them as possible. In addition, the slides will be distributed shortly after the completion of the webinar to all of you that registered, and a recording of the webinar will also be made online. Before we begin with presentations, I'd like to provide a brief word about ADIS and introduce our speakers. For those of you that are unfamiliar, ADIS is a technology and solutions development organization with nearly 600 participants active in our industry forums. ADIS brings together the global ICT companies to advance the industry's most pressing business priorities. ADIS is accredited by the American National Standards Institute and is the North American partner in 3GPP. ADIS's partnership in 3GPP allows for coordination among ADIS members to represent not only business needs, but also requirements for the North American region. For our speakers today, first we have Allison Blevins, Senior Director of Numbering Policy and Regulatory Affairs at Cinch. With over 25 years of experience in the telecommunications industry, Allison is a recognized leader in modernizing numbering practices. She's been co-chair of the ADIS Industry Numbering Committee, also known as INC, since 2016, and worked closely with regulators and industry groups to shape policy and drive innovation. Our second presenter, who will join us shortly, is Phil Lindsay, Director of Public Policy at Lumen. Phil is a highly respected voice in the industry, representing Lumen in various groups and forums. He was recently elected chair of the North American Portability Management, LLC, and currently serves as chair of ADIS's non-IP call authentication task force. He's also been a key contributor to federal advisory efforts, including implementation of the 988 suicide hotline code. With more than 25 years of telecommunications experience, Phil brings us a wealth of information and expertise to today's session. Today's session will deliver practical information for regulatory bodies, service providers, and industry vendors to discern whether a rate center consolidation is appropriate and to provide the information needed for successful implementation. The presentation will center around implementation of the rate center consolidation changes, what items need to be considered, pre-planning, checklist by role, and industry notification. In closing, I expect that we will have time for some questions and answers. So we hope that you can stay with us. And Allison, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us, and let's begin.
All right. Thank you to Jackie and to Joe as well. And welcome, everyone. And let's see. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about the INC, the Industry Numbering Committee. It was formed in 1993 due to the first study by NAMPA regarding the future of numbering. And INC is recognized as the industry's forum for addressing and developing solutions for numbering issues related to the planning, administration, allocation, assignment, and use of the North American Numbering Plan, the NAMP, numbering resources within the U.S. The FCC's rules require that the NAMPA, the billing and collection agents, and states exercising area code relief authority follow INC guidelines, including for NREF reporting and number assignments. Additionally, service providers, vendors, regulatory bodies, and other numbering stakeholders utilize these industry guidelines. All right. So the purpose today is to talk about what is large-scale rate center consolidation, and you're going to hear me say that quite a lot, or abbreviated as LSRCC, because large-scale rate center consolidation can be a little bit of a mouthful. It is the process of combining multiple rate centers into a single larger rate center, and it's not something that happens overnight. What we are considering a large-scale rate center consolidation would require at least 90 days of planning and coordinated implementation. As INC, we didn't want to define the number of rate centers that was considered to be large scale, we're leaving that to the incumbent providers to make that determination due to other matters that we're going to get into. And this is important because it helps us conserve numbering resources by improving utilization, extending the lifespan of existing NPAs or area codes. In practice, that means that we could delay or avoid new area code relief efforts. LSRCC also can simplify provisioning and routing arrangements, and in turn can reduce administrative overhead or regulatory complexity for everyone that's involved. So the LSRCC document, the ADIS reference document, was created to serve as a roadmap. It's designed to help guide regulators, service providers, vendors, other interested parties by summarizing the history of consolidation efforts, outlining the benefits, and providing detailed planning and implementation steps. And the goal was to encourage consistent practices across jurisdictions and ensure a smooth, coordinated transitions and effort wherever the LSRCC is pursued. Right. So large scale rate center consolidation and rate center consolidation is not new. As you can see, we have significant historical context and precedents going back to the 2000 FCC NRO and additional work by the Nancy and Addis working groups, including most recently the 2023 Nancy NAOWG report and recommendation on the feasibility of individual telephone number, otherwise known as ITN pooling trials, and alternative means for conserving numbering resources. So again, going back to 2000, this laid the foundation for industry discussion regarding rate center consolidation, and the following papers and reports also acknowledge, technological and regulatory challenges that need to be addressed, and just other significant work efforts, and also naming consolidation as a key conservation strategy as well. Okay. For our policy objective and benefits, of course, the first one would be to delay area code exhaust, improve utilization forecasting, simplify provisioning operations, reduce regulatory administrative burdens as well. Consolidations can significantly delay the exhaustive area codes by combining the rate centers. We improve number utilization and extend the lifespan, reducing the frequency of which new area code relief is needed. And by consolidating by consolidating rate centers into larger areas, the numbering demand better reflects the actual customer need as well. And then it can simplify operations. Service providers benefit from streamlined provisioning, routing, tariff arrangements. It's less, work for NRUFs filings as well. And it can reduce your complexity and your potential for error. And then again, going back to our regulatory and administrative burdens, regulators face fewer relief proceedings, and carriers may have fewer interconnect and tariff obligations to manage across multiple small rate centers as well. And one of the words you're going to hear us say a lot is talking about collaboration. So the stakeholders and the roles are regulatory bodies, whether that's state commissions or the FCC, service providers of all types, the NAMPA, and TRA, which is the Telecom Routing Administration. So the regulatory bodies in regulated states, they approve consolidations. And let's see, thank you, Joe. And then they collaborate with service providers to set timelines and effective dates. In deregulated states, they monitor impacts and customer notices as well. Service providers, especially incumbent providers, they're going to lead with the technical planning with regulatory bodies. And all providers will have to work on updating their switches, their routing, their operational support systems, their OSS systems, and work on notifying their customers. NAMPA and TRA will issue industry notices and make updates to the relevant databases. That could be NAS, BIRDS, LERC, and TPMs as well. See, we are on potential impacts of consolidation, and I'm going to see if Phil is able to join us.
Yeah, I think I am. Can you hear me?
Okay, wasn't glad the technology cooperated. Okay, we
Oh
are
my
on
goodness.
potential impacts if you want to take this one for me.
Yeah, just 1 second.
Sure.
I'm just getting on and just getting kind of things in order here, so I apologize.
Okay. No,
Give me a couple
you were
seconds here.
fine. I could give you a few more minutes as well.
Okay, hold
And this is
on.
a good time since we're partly through. If anyone has any questions so far, please, as Joe mentioned, feel free to use the Q&A function in Teams, and we will address those at the end as well.
Okay, I think I've got where I need to be here. Um, so the potential impacts, let me see here 1 second. I apologize again. Here we go. So regulatory bodies, reduction of MPA relief proceedings. So with uh, the reduction of rate centers or the consolidation of them, which basically results in the reduction of rate centers, then that makes more resources available throughout that MPA. So you end up with the lower demand for MPA relief, makes numbers more available. Thus, then we have a reduction in MPA relief proceedings, right? So from operationally, simplifies provisioning routing, so you have less rate centers to manage across the MPA, OSS updates across carriers, fewer rate centers, fewer updates to be made. The decrease in administrative workload to the reduced number of rate centers. Of course, with fewer rate centers, then there's fewer numbering issues to deal with, right? So with number portability and those kinds of things, you have less issues around whether or not you can port numbers since you're consolidating those rate centers, those kinds of things. And that kind of more goes towards the consumer piece of that, which is the changes local toll. And then, kind of a little add on to there is number portability expands the ability for customers to port their numbers isn't so geographic restrictive. So am I missing anything there, Allison?
No, I think you've got it.
Okay.
We're going to get into this a little bit in the next few slides, but again, I think the theme is collaboration again between all of us working in this ecosystem.
Yeah. So with regard to the regulatory bodies, I mean, when you look at the MPA relief or the consolidation efforts, of course we have to work with the impacts to the different service providers along with regulators and how that needs to be coordinated and collaboration together on how, what rate centers make sense to consolidate, whether or not it's, and I guess I look at the examples of, there was a proposal in Maine to do a large scale rate center consolidation. And then I think Montana is looking at investigating that as well. When you look at Maine, you might have more higher density areas, more of an opportunity to combine more rate centers versus maybe in Montana, which is just a vast area. It may make more sense to consolidate more regionally within the state versus LATA wide or those kinds of things. So there's a lot of considerations to be taken in order to kind of determine what makes sense, right? So I'm going to do the next slide.
Absolutely. Okay. So we'll move on to our pre-implementation planning that we were just talking about. So in our ADIS document, we have a pre-implementation planning section and a checklist as well to provide assistance. And they're very closely linked. And regulators and the incumbent provider should work together to set the effective dates regarding this. And some of the things, again, at the beginning of pre-implementation that need to be discussed is confirming that the consolidations don't cross LATA or NPA boundaries. Again, going back, establishing effective dates and timelines, and consider mass communication. So that could be an informational webinar, public notice, industry calls, um, to get the word out, because as we mentioned, service providers, regulators, the vendors that we work with, also you may want to ensure that your OSS vendors are aware for billing purposes as well. And everyone here plays a critical role. We don't, again, mention we don't want to cross the boundaries like LATAs or NPAs. We want to ensure that everyone in the potentially impacted area has, awareness of the situation or potential situation. Service providers also will need to review trunking capacity, routing, switch readiness. They may need to take a look at their interconnection updates as well, if there are any that need to be done. Are there any updated tariffs as well? And I might be getting ahead, Joe. I think we've got a next slide.
Actually, and I've got
Yeah, go
something to
ahead,
add
Phil.
there. If you
Yeah.
go back to that previous slide,
Oh,
just
please.
a side note with the whole LATA MPA boundaries, one thing to also consider when you're talking about number preservation, you may have MPA boundaries that may be within the LATA, right? And so one of the strategies that I think was implemented in Arizona was the combination of a MPA, so elimination of the MPA boundary, which then created basically an overlay type situation where you may have one MPA that has more resources available than another. In order to provide additional numbering resource, you may just eliminate that boundary. That then allows those underutilized codes to then be used across the entire overlaid MPA area, right? And then once you do that, then that kind of eliminates that MPA boundary as far as doing rate center consolidation. So as you may further need to, better utilize numbering resources, you can then start looking at rate center consolidations, once those MPA boundaries have been eliminated, if it's within the LATA. An example of a potential for that might be in Minnesota. I think there are several MPA boundaries within LATAs that potentially have the potential to help provide additional numbering resources without necessarily moving to the level of rate center consolidation kind of thing. So that's just kind of a footnote, if you will, on that. So there's just different strategies that we can take advantage of depending on the situation. Again, it's each state could have a unique situation that may require a little different strategy. So.
Absolutely. And again, great take on the NPA boundaries. And we're also saying about the LATA boundaries. LATA boundaries do not always follow state lines as well. I many of you know I'm from Northwest Florida. The LATA that I grew up in, part of that goes into Alabama as well. And there's other states and other areas with that. Many states have multiple LATAs. Phil has mentioned Maine, that is only one LATA. But you look at a state like Montana, Florida, California, you're going to have multiple LATAs. And with the way that the NPAC is structured currently today and the porting requirements as well, We don't want to try to merge rate centers crossing LATA boundaries because it could have additional implications that may indirectly cause call completion issues or routing issues. And the last thing any service provider or anyone working on this wants to do is negatively impact their customers or their business. Right. Right. And then finally, talking about pre-implementation planning, the other service provider impacts, like we just talked about, we're going to have to assess our trunking, our routing, our switch readiness, identify OSS and interconnection changes if there are any that need to be made. And Phil, anything else you want to add here before? Sorry, Joe, if you could go back one
Yeah, I
about
mean,
a specific trunking and routing.
yeah, I mean, and when you start looking at rate center consolidations and portability and that kind of stuff, and you may have like an area where there may be, competitive environment where you may have adjacent rate centers that are exempt from that. So those things have to be taken into consideration as well. And so just not impossible to do, but just things that need to be taken into consideration.
Definitely things to think about. You may have some areas where the rate centers in, let's just say, a large area are only served by one tandem, but then you could get into a more densely populated rate centers and you could have multiple tandems that are impacted, and all of that is going to need to be looked at by your network planning and your capacity teams as well. Okay. Joe, thank you, Joe. All right, and finally, we've talked a little bit about the work that NAMPA and TRA do. They help prepare the preliminary industry notifications, and they ensure that NAS, BIRDS, LERG, TPM are updated and assist with with industry notifications, getting the word out as well. And this is to again reflect that the changes and that all the database updates are made with the effective date. So there's no out of sync conditions going there. And then one last thing to think about in the pre-implementation stage is scheduling considerations. We strongly suggest to avoid your NREF windows. So that would even be including the month prior. Your NREF filings are due February 1st and August 1st. So we would also suggest avoiding this work in January and July because of reporting as well taking place during those months. And also, we would also strongly suggest avoiding major holidays because it can unnecessarily increase complications. So that's a lot of companies have moratoriums, let's just say between Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's going to be a harder time for companies to do the type of work that's necessary for this as well. So again, if you're coming from a state regulator perspective, working with your incumbents is, absolutely necessary, and also working with the other service providers to work and schedule around these timeframes.
Yeah, generally, that Thanksgiving to Christmas actually extends to the end of the year because of New Year's and that kind of stuff. And those moratoriums go into place, regardless of, kind of activity like this. So that
Yes.
staff is a lot more limited, and those systems are, people aren't in those systems making changes, so they tend to delay this kind of activity until after those moratoriums.
Okay. So we're going to move on to implementation considerations. And we'll start with the regulator incumbent service provider, because once pre-implementation planning is complete, the focus is shift now to putting in place the plan that was come up with. So the regulator and your incumbent service provider, they should absolutely collaborate on the schedule. and jointly confirm readiness before industry notices are issued. And in deregulated states, they may want to monitor the impacts and ensure that customer notices are sent out. And again, work with the incumbent provider on making sure that all of the notices, going back to what we talked about in pre-implementation, are there calls, again, notices, network notices that could be sent out to increase awareness as well. All right. Let's see. For service providers, again, they'll need to work on updating switch translations, routing, OSS systems, billing systems, your local calling areas. You may need to look at adding trunking capacity if it's needed, and also provide clear customer notifications. So this could be changes to local toll calling, any type of billing impacts as well. You may have a situation of where something was a toll call and is now a local call. And you may want to, inform your customers of that. You should inform your customers of that, I would think. And any other billing impacts, you may have the reverse. Something that may have been considered a local call is no longer considered local. Again, these are things that all service providers should be looking at as well. And again, coming back to NAMPA and TRA, they will issue the industry notices when they are notified of the final effective dates. And again, they'll ensure that the systems are updated with the consolidated rate center information. All right. Joe, do you mind if you go back briefly to the implementation considerations? I'm going to ask Bill, is there anything else that we want to cover with implementation itself? I was thinking maybe we both could talk some more about like the effective dates and getting the effective dates aligned. And if there do need to be changes that may be discovered during the pre-implementation phase that we need to work on, ensuring that everyone is updated with those changes.
Yeah, I mean, I think flexibility is probably kind of a key element of this is, because I know we haven't done a consolidation for quite a while, and I don't know if there's been much other activity in like territories other than like Lumen. So I'm just speaking about Lumen's territory. So we haven't done much as far as consolidation. So, like with, I'm sure other companies, resources are getting thinner and thinner. We're having a lot of attrition where people that have done this before are no longer with the company. So it's almost like we got to relearn some of this stuff and understand kind of where the impacts are. So from a timing perspective, definitely going to be important to be flexible.
Yes, exactly. We mentioned, you may start on your pre-implementation, you may have a goal of, let's just say, end of next year, end of 2026, and as the incumbent service providers certainly look at the scope of what's being done, that in fourth quarter 2026 may not be realistic to provide the best experience for all involved. And so again, collaboration and notification and working together with the states, even in deregulated states, to inform everyone of those changes to ensure that all industry participants are aware is going to be key to this. So as part of the guidelines that Inc. came up with, we created an Annex A, which is an industry notification form. And it's a template that can be used with the information that's going to be needed by the industry. It's going to include the scope, proposed effective dates, milestones, and points of contact. And NAM and TRA have committed to distributing these and other notifications when requested. So the document provides like a basic guide to get the information out, to make it easier and to have consistency with these projects. And we're hoping, oh, sorry, Joe. I was going to say by standardizing the format, we're hoping that it prevents confusion and ensures that there's alignment across all of the stakeholders and helps support a smooth implementation of the project. Okay. And so now we can go ahead and move on to questions if there are any.
Yes, we definitely have a few. I'm Joe Seibel, an ADIS coordinator, and I'll help moderate the Q&A portion here. So those of you who submitted questions online or ahead of time even, thank you very much. Just as a general note, I did see a question. The slides and a recording of the webinar will be made available at addis.org after this, and they'll also be shared, so no worries there. Okay, we have a clarifying question very quickly. That may have been addressed previously, but is this rate center consolidation going to be done primarily on rate centers within a particular LATA, not affecting inter-LATA routing, just to be clear?
So I'm sorry.
Well,
Do you want?
and this is Phil.
Mhm.
I think what the question is really referring to is whether or not the inter-LATA routing is impacted by rate center consolidation. And I would suggest that it does not. Only to the extent that, potentially there may be some route changes from a local perspective that, a call may take a different route. But as far as the tandems are concerned and how calls route into either the tandem or the end office, there shouldn't be really any changes due to the fact that, if you're honoring the LATA boundaries and you're not trying to expand rate centers across the LATA boundary, there shouldn't be any kind of impact there. But go ahead, Allison, if you had different thoughts there.
No, I think that's it. I was just reading the question to make sure that I understood. Yes, we are suggesting that the rate center consolidation stay within the LATA as not to impact. So Phil, I think you've got it.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Another question we have here, has LSRCR in the US been driven by the industry or the regulators? And then either way, have the regulators been supportive of changes to any that the public must accept, such as rates or LCAs?
Yeah, so I'll try and take this. In the past, it's been a little bit of both. I can think of, it's been a while. I would consider what AT&T did in San Antonio several years ago to be considered large-scale rate center consolidation. I believe that was driven by AT&T. Recently, it seems to be more regulatory driven. As Phil mentioned, Maine has an effort right now. New Hampshire also has one, and Montana has just opened a docket requesting information regarding large-scale rate center consolidation. And I don't want to speak for any of the commission staff that would be on, but I would say from discussing this with other service providers and just general conversation that the commission staff have definitely been supportive of these efforts as well.
Great, thank you. Relatedly, are there any other roles that state and federal regulators play in rate center consolidations?
So I would say, Joe, that that's going to depend on the state. As we mentioned, we do have some states that are deregulated regarding numbering. So that's a little bit different than a regulated state who is going to have a little bit more authority. Uh, you know, different states have different means. I know some of the states are certainly more involved in the conversation and processes as well. So don't want to be general, but I think that's going to be state specific about their involvement.
Great, thanks, Allison.
Mhm.
Another question, we've got quite a few here, which is great.
Yeah.
Will service providers with existing tariffs have any input into which rate centers are selected for consolidation?
So I can try and take that, that what I have seen with the current efforts is the states are working with the incumbent providers on which rate centers will be consolidated. I believe, and I'm hoping I'm not misspeaking for Maine. I believe originally there were a certain set of rate centers that were looked at, and that expanded. So I would say that service providers would have input into that due to tariffs and other routing obligations as the incumbent. Bill, did I get that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think historically, rate center, the consolidation construct has really been initiated by service providers, and then, the state regulators help, collaborate associated with that. Because you've got, impacts to, the compensation. So you're taking, excuse me if I enunciate my words here. If you have a toll type arrangement or inter-exchange type arrangement between two rate centers and you consolidate them and they become local, now you have to kind of figure out how you want to deal with the compensation if you want to maintain a revenue neutral type arrangement and decide kind of what type of you might call them EAS additives or whatever in order to make those companies whole. And that's all part of I think the collaboration, the discussion between those service providers, that what makes sense, and then how do you move forward to make everybody, make it beneficial to all, right? And at the same time, because I think typically when you look at rate center consolidations, the number preservation or number and resource preservation wasn't necessarily the primary goal, right? It was more of there's a community of interest here, doesn't make a community of interest here that doesn't make sense to have a toll type arrangement any further. Then the service providers get together and say, yeah, let's consolidate this rate center. It makes sense to make this, more of a local type arrangement and, open this up. And then, one of the side effects of that is you end up with having more numbering resources made available as well. More recently, because you look at the potential exhaust of the NAMP, now rate center consolidation, especially based on some of the Nancy reports that have been put out, have recommended rate center consolidation to help extend the life of the NAMP. So I think the motivation is starting to shift a little bit, but I still think there needs to be that, collaboration agreement between service providers of the impacted rate centers.
Great, thank you both. Regarding implementation, is there a timeline regarding how much notice will be given before implementation, and when would you expect a first implementation notification to go out?
So the checklist in the document for the large-scale rate center consolidation was written with the mind of this would be work that would require more than 90 days notice, I believe is what was in the document. I'm hoping I'm not wrong with that. And I think that was I'll have to double check, one of the beginnings of the slides. And again, this is going to be in collaboration between the incumbent service provider and, if it's a regulated state, the state commission. There's different levels of work depending on the scope and what's needing to be done or what's wanting to be done. What is the reason for consolidation? And I think, speaking as a service provider, I think I will have agreement with all service providers on this. The more notice we have, I think the better. Internally, I don't think you're going to go wrong with having more notice as well. So that's kind of the timeline that we were looking at going forward. But again, it's going to be state specific as well, and possibly even area specific within the state on notice.
Great, thank you. Another question, are there any ADIS guidelines or NECA updates that need to be made before LSRC is started? And what are the timeframes for the scope that was developed in terms of those standards?
So I know we just updated the TB COCAG, I think, with some information about rate center consolidation. We do have this latest ADIS reference document regarding a large-scale rate center consolidation, which is available on ADIS Workspace as well. And again, I think our scope is large scale rate center consolidation would be anything over 90 days. Here's another example as well. I don't want to, I'll pick on a large geographic state, but maybe with a smaller population. That level of effort may be significantly different than if you had a smaller state with with a higher population concentration, more tandems as well, more service providers. There's different levels. So we didn't want to say that a rate center consolidation is X number of rate centers because of all these other complexities. And again, there's going to be a difference in time frame depending on what is trying to be accomplished during the scope of the project. I'm going to ask Phil if there's anything he wants to add to that.
No, I think that pretty much covers it. When we talk about complexities, I mean, there are such a dynamic variety of considerations when you start looking at those consolidations and impacts to local calling areas and things like that. So it just really depends on kind of how complex that gets. So.
Great, thank you. All right, shifting gears just a bit. If and I'm looking at a question from Melinda in the Q&A here. If we're talking about NPA boundaries and complicated boundaries, so for example, in New York Zone 1, there's one NPA that covers other zones, but it's still only one NPA. Is there consolidation that will happen, or does this mean that boundary elimination would need to be done first?
So I'm going to say that one's a little bit more complicated. Thinking of New York Zone 1, that New York Zone 1, if I remember correctly, and I know someone on the call is going to know this better than I do, I believe the current New York Zone 1 is actually a combination of at least one more, maybe two more New York zones that combined into New York Zone 1. And for those of you that are not familiar, New York Zone 1 is now the island of Manhattan, if I remember correctly. Mindy, I would say that has got to be looked at due to some other complexities regarding the calling and the other zones. When you get into the zones and the districts, especially in very dense areas like New York City or even LA, they're going to have their own quirks in that. And that may have to be looked at as part of area code relief because you've got NPAs and overlays, and maybe in some instances, there was a previous boundary elimination, like in the case of Los Angeles.
Great, perfect, thanks. Another question here. So an NPA overlay was just done a year ago. So what is the difference here with the LSRCCs? Will I just get a letter from my PUC or NAMPA telling me that there are going to be rate center consolidations? How does that work?
Yeah, so NPA relief would be separate from rate center consolidation. So if you're, let me just take again, for example, maybe New Hampshire, right? Because there's efforts right now to do rate center consolidation as part of number conservation efforts there. If New Hampshire had a new overlay, that would have been done independently of consolidation, and now they would be going back between the incumbent and the state and looking at consolidating those rate centers. So the PUC or NAMPA or TRA would have sent notifications. Now, as we've mentioned, there are some states that have been working on this topic for quite some time prior to this ADIS reference document going out. So it's kind of before that. The reference document was just published in August, so this is very new for us. So I don't think anything in the document's been used yet, but I would say everybody at Inks is excited to see how this works in practice.
Yeah, and I think, a little bit of clarification on that as well. When you start looking at the purposes of rate center consolidation, one is if you've got a community of interest that traverses a toll arrangement, and it makes sense that the community of interest, why do I have to buy, dial a toll number in order to contact someone that is now more closely, as far as that community of interests, doctors and lawyers and people that you would want to call as a local call, right? And so those rate center consolidations can be established based on that community of interest, and then more recently based on the number resource conservation. By doing consolidation, you're also releasing stranded numbering resources. So that's another reason. If you end up in that situation where you've exhausted all those numbers, so let's say you've done all the consolidations you can, and you're still running short on resources, that's when you start doing an overlay type regime, where then you start overlaying another MPA in order to make those resources available. It's really more of a kind of a staged, and historically, rate center consolidation wasn't necessarily used for number conservation purposes. It was more for more of a community of interest type thing, and it was initiated by those service providers that have communities that want to have more of a expanded community of interest, have that local calling type arrangement, that kind of thing, right? And more recently, it's become more of a potential tool for number resource preservation. So I hope that
Great.
helps.
Thanks, Phil. All right, sort of hopping back to the patchwork of, regulated, deregulated states. In those deregulated states, how can commissions remain engaged without a formal authority on this?
I'll try and start. I'm going to ask Phil to keep me honest with this. I would say just by interacting with your incumbent provider in there, in the state. I know several states have great relationships with the incumbent providers and other service providers. So again, just working with them on the collaboration and understanding the scope of the project, because we see this in area code relief calls. A lot of times the public will go to the commission. So I would think as service providers, keeping commission staff informed of the work benefits both parties to a certain extent.
Yeah, and regulators can engage with service providers to see if there's opportunities, if they see opportunities based on maybe their visibility into the NAMP. They can engage with those service providers to see if it makes sense to do rate center consolidation, those kinds of things. So I think it is, collaboration is, I think, a big element of this as well. And I don't think that it should exclude the state regulators in that effort. So
Great, thank you. Another question here. What methods are there to maintain revenue neutrality?
can you say that question again?
What methods are there to maintain revenue neutrality in this scenario?
Okay. Oh, thank you. That's what I thought you said, but I just want to make sure I wasn't missing it. So like there are like additives. So when you start moving from a toll arrangement to a local arrangement, there are revenue differentials. So what one company would obtain as revenue based on the toll calling that may exist. Some instances they do like a EAS additive, which is like an additive onto the bill that says, okay, based on the lost toll revenue, there may be a additive that's on the bill that says this makes up for that toll revenue, and then that's applied across the rate base. There could be a just an increase in rate, that kind of thing, or those are kind of the two main methods that I'm aware of. I think there could be others that I'm not aware of, because again, I haven't been engaged with rate center consolidation specifically on the rate items, and then of course there could be an agreement that we'll just both maybe the revenue isn't significant enough to where maybe it's just makes sense to not have any additive. Maybe you just write that off, if you will. I wouldn't. It's not probably not the correct terminology, but you're basically just saying that, hey, it just makes sense to have these areas local, and then there is no consideration for revenue neutrality there.
Great, thank you. A couple more questions here. We're getting near to the end of our time. What challenges do smaller providers face in these kinds of projects?
And I think from a smaller provider perspective, when you're talking like an independent LEC or that, I think the revenue issue becomes more significant. I think in any kind of transport that might be modified, so there could be additional costs or lack of cost recovery associated with that transport. Those kinds of things could come into play. And then from like a competitive provider perspective, I don't know if they're necessarily those same issues. I think those issues are more specific to like a independent type arrangement where you're consolidating unaffiliated type exchanges and rate centers.
Awesome. Okay, right now I have one last question I think wraps it up nicely. If there's any last second ones, please feel free to drop them in that Q&A function there. But this one here is, are there any examples of successful LSRCC implementation and what learnings were taken from those, if any?
That's a good question. It seems like maybe Allison might be having some difficulty in the audio.
Oh, what about,
there
can
you
you hear me?
Oh,
okay.
Yep,
Yeah.
I can hear you. Sorry.
All right.
And Allison, you had provided an example. I don't know if you have any more insight into that example. It's probably more than I have.
Yeah, I will go ahead and say that again, I would consider, and I hope AT&T would agree with me because this was in their market, the projects many years ago to consolidate several rate centers around San Antonio into the San Antonio Rate Center to be a successful project. Again, I think there's some going on right now. As we mentioned, Maine is in progress right now. And looks to be successful. And again, there's new efforts ongoing in New Hampshire and potentially in Montana. I will say the NAMPA website has a link to past rate center consolidations and even small rate center consolidations as well. And I believe that history goes back to the early 2000s. And that information is available and is public as well too. So rate center consolidation itself is not something new. But when we get into talking potentially about, I'll even say 75 plus rate centers or, 50 plus rate centers, that is something that's a little bit newer.
All right, Great. There's no more questions pending in the chat here, so I think that kind of lines us up nicely. As we're kind of running out of time here, I'd like to thank both Allison and Phil for their work and their presentation. This was really great engagement, I think. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. I will ask you if you could go to the next slide. I would also like to thank everyone who participates in Inc. And these are the Inc. members. And for people in this membership group that helped craft this reference document and help provide feedback with the slides as well. I want to thank all of my peers.
Thank you so much.
I echo that as well. So it's definitely a team effort, and that's a very high functioning group as far as I'm concerned, and all the groups I'm engaged with. So it is a great group to be involved with, and they put out excellent work.
Great, thank you. Yes, and if anybody is interested at all in learning more about what Inc. does, you can visit addis.org and you'll find plenty of information there. All right. As a reminder to everybody, the slides from today's webinar will be distributed in the near future to all registered participants. And as there are no more questions, on behalf of Addis, we'd like to thank you again for attending today's webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.